be able to answer them right away. But probably what I want. Okay, this has the transfer of the picture has stopped, right? So now I can put this one in, I think. Yeah, perfect. I want to put it like this. Yeah, okay, this is perfect. This is now the way I wanted it to be, right? So yeah, probably I'm gonna keep the answers for the end. So okay, I guess we should just start with it, right? Do I still want to have another picture of the HUD on the side so you're gonna be always able to see it? I guess we can do it like that. Put it like this. I'm gonna open this HUD again on the side like this. So you're always gonna be able to see the HUD, right? I think this is the way I want to keep it. Something like this. I hope everything is visible nicely. Yeah, it is. Okay, great. So okay, let me just remove the number of hands from the stream because it's irrelevant right now. Plus, on top of that, it's just kind of a yeah, like this. Okay, so basically, guys, welcome to our first theory stream. I guess I think this is our first theory stream. I don't think we made any more in the past. So yeah, today I'm going to be talking about a HUD. It's kind of a promise that I made to two of my viewers. And I think it's gonna I think a lot of you guys can benefit from it, especially guys playing on lower limits. Of course, I'm not gonna be explaining every stat of the HUD in a really in a basic manner. I'm not gonna go into VPI, PPFR, right? I'm gonna assume you know what those stats means, right? So it's not gonna be a really HUD for dummies, like from a totally a beginner course. But I'm gonna talk about which stats I use, how I use them, why I use them, in what way I use them, how do they help me, how many hands you need on certain stats to be relevant. And also afterwards we can talk about pop-ups a bit, which I'm going to show you how I have my pop-ups designed and how you should kind of try to have your pop-ups organized because I think it's gonna be effective. I am in no way an expert on this topic. I don't know. I don't have it crushed down to the bottom, right? I'm just an average user, maybe a bit more than an intermediate user of a HUD, right? I have a bit more detailed stats on the HUD. I use pop-ups a lot, so I think it helps me when I play a lot. And this is something I kind of want to share with you guys, right? So I guess the best way to start is just to go from the beginning, right? So this is my HUD, how it looks when I'm playing, right? So you can see there are different colors right away. This is more or less a personal preference. You can either have all one colors, maybe two colors. Some people prefer at least like two colors. Some people prefer to have it rainbowy. I mean, mine is kind of rainbowy right now, right? I could as well just use one color. It wouldn't mind me. But this way, certain stats just pop out more, right? So you can find them pretty easily. For example, I have VPIP and PFR in yellow here, 2115, and I know that 3-bet is also in yellow, 3.2. And the next one, the orange one, is fold to 3-bet, right? So my eyes can immediately go to that orange stat and know it's fold to 3-bet, for example. So this is just a personal preference, right? So to begin, the thing that is kind of blacked out, actually it's blued out, right? It's all in the blue right now. It's player name, right? So I'm just gonna make, why doesn't it work like black? So name, it's kind of a I think it's kind of self-explanatory, right? So I don't need to tell you that. Then it is number of hands, number of hands. It's also the same pretty much. So this is just my first line, right? This is the line that I just want to check. You don't need to have the name on the HUD, right? The reason I had it is because when I was using Zoom, at some point there was an update with the HUD manager, and usually the HUD didn't get updated when I was dealt a new hand. When I was moved to a new table, it didn't have the HUD didn't update. It stayed from the previous table, right? Which meant that I was looking at the stats from a certain guy, but in reality the stats were from the guy in the previous table, right? So that's why I included the name, so I can always check if the name on the HUD is the same as the name of the player at the table. So I'm kind of sure 100% that it's the same, it's exactly the same guy that hit those stats actually belong to that guy, right? So that's pretty much it in terms of that. Of course, you have number of hands, which is pretty self-explanatory as well, right? The more hands you have, the better on people. The next line is VPIP and PFR. These two stats are pretty self-explanatory to you two, most likely. At least if you're using a HUD, you know what they mean, right? I mean, probably like I'm gonna be talking about probably 6max game nowadays, because it's probably most popular nowadays. Heads up, of course, it's definitely popular. 9max is not that popular anymore, so I'm going to be talking like for stat values, right? For values of certain stats, I'm going to be talking in terms of 6max, also 6-handed game, right? So basically, this tells you how much a certain player puts money in the pot voluntarily and how much he raises pre-flop, right? So the first stat is the percentage of how many hands he plays in general. The second one is the percentage of how much hands he raises as a pre-flop raiser, right? So I guess we could say something of a taggish player today would be around 22-18. I guess most of you would agree that that's something that is kind of considered tag today in 6max games. Somebody could argue it's a bit wider. Somebody could say it's a bit tighter. I'm gonna leave it like that. So basically, what you can learn from this is if he has a tighter stats, like a lower value of that, the lower they are, the nittier he is. The higher they are, the more aggressive, the wider the guy is, right? So the next in line is 3-bet, which is how much somebody 3-bets, right? Fold to 3-bet, which is, I mean, obviously, again, self-explanatory, right? So 3-bet, then fold to 3-bet. These two stats are pretty much self-explanatory. It just tells me how much somebody is 3-betting, the percentage, and how much he's folding 3-bets. And the next one, this is actually a C-bet stat. So C-bet flop and fold to C-bet flop. So these two stats here are basically, I mean, they're pretty important, right? But they're basically post-flop stats, right? I do use them on the HUD because I still want to have a C-betting stat on the HUD. A lot of people also use turn C-bet, fold to turn C-bet, reverse C-bet, fold to reverse C-bet, right? Which is fine. For example, me personally, I don't think it's necessary to have it on the HUD, to have it visible all the time, but I do have it in the pop-ups, right? So every time I check the pop-ups, every time I want to know how much somebody's barreling, how much he's folding to barrels, I just check the pop-ups, right? But on the HUD, I think it's okay to have at least a rough idea how often they're C-betting flop or how often they're folding to flop C-bets, okay? So then it's the third line, basically, right? Let me put this in the same line so there won't be any confusion, right? So in the next line, we have 4-bet percentage, then fold to 4-bet percentage, and a 4-bet range. This line basically, of course, I mean, there's some more in the afterwards, but first of all, in this line, I just kind of get a feeling of how people play when I 3-bet and how they react versus that. They tell me, or how often they fold when I 4-bet them, right? So basically, they tell me the percentage. This percentage is just like, this is just a pure percentage, right? The amount of the times he has been 3-betted, and like the amount of the times he has 4-betted in comparison to either just call a 3-bet or fold it. So it's just a ratio between him 4-betting versus either calling or folding to a 3-bet, right? So this is basically just tells me the rough percentage, how much he's 4-betting. So if his 4-bet percentage is, for example, 25%, right? It means that he has been the easiest way is just to think about it is he has been 4-betted, for example, 4 times, or like you can even say 100 times, and out of those 100 times, the 25 times he 4-betted. Other 75 times he either folded or called the 3-bet, right? Or we can say he has been 4-betted 4 times, and one of those 4 times he 4-betted, and the other 3 he either folded or called a 3-bet, right? Next is the fold to 4-bet percentage, which is the same, right? And the next one is 4-bet range. This stat is a bit more complex and it's different to 4-bet percentage. Why? Because the 4-bet percentage gives us the ratio between him 4-betting versus calling or folding to a 3-bet. Whereas 4-bet range actually tells us the range, the percent of hands that he is 4-betting with, right? This is calculated a bit differently. it actually considers his opening range in a certain position, and the amount of the times he four bets, and it calculates the approximate range of hands that he's four betting with, right? So for example, if somebody has a four bet range of 2.5% roughly, that can mean that he has a pretty strong range, right? Because 2.5% range means queens plus an ace king, right? So if somebody is only four betting for value and has a 2.5% four bet range, it always means that he only has queens and ace king, right? So this value is kind of important, but you have to be careful that you kind of explain it right to yourself, right? And also you need quite a big sample for those, like for this stat to kind of be valued, right? Though I don't use this stat if I have like 200 hands on somebody or 300 hands, because in that many hands it's not gonna actually show the real tendencies of a player, right? But if I have like 2k hands, 3k hands, 5k hands on people, then this stat is gonna be quite accurate, right? And again, maybe like if this stat says 2.5%, it probably means that it doesn't mean that he always has queens and ace king, right? He can balance it with some bluffs. But what in general, it means that he has a really tight range when he four bets, really, really tight range. So you should be really careful about it, right? Okay, let's see. Ukayala is asking here, do you use 3-bet and fold to 3-bet regarding position in the pop-up, or you don't care? Yes, I actually do. I actually do have a pop-up where it shows me how much they are open, like how much they're 3-betting and folding to 3-bet by positions. We can just again open this. I'm gonna have this open on the side too, so I can show it to you, right? So for example, if I go under the 3-bet stats, I have this big pop-up, and you can see here you have a 3-bet, and then by position, how much they're 3-betting by position. You see 3-bet in MP, in cutoff, in button, in small line, in the big blind, and then how much versus hero and how much versus everyone, right? So I can actually get a feeling how much they're 3-betting, but for that you need a lot of stats. And if I go under fold to 3-bet, I get this pop-up, right? Okay, no, actually not. I need to check this one, sorry. So yeah, so this is the second one that I look at how much they're folding to 3-bets, and you see here how much they're opening by position and how much they're folding to 3-bets from a certain position, right? So it tells me how much they do that. So yeah, I definitely use positional stats too, for sure. I think they're important, especially at a point where you have when you have a lot of hands on people, right? The more hands you have on people, the more you should be inclined to use positional stats. How's 4-bet range called inside Hold'em Manager 2? I think it's simply called 4-bet range. I can just check, but I think it's called just 4-bet range. Let me just see. So stat appearance, it's called total 4-bet range. Exactly. Just you can see just TOT 4-bet range. So it's basically just a 4-bet range. Okay, hey there, Magic. How's it going? Okay, let's go back to the explanations. So the next stats are when to showdown, one when soft flop. This one is kind of irrelevant. I'm not even gonna explain this one because it's kind of a complex and I don't even use it that much. But I'm gonna $1 at showdown. I'm gonna talk about the other two about other two stats a bit. So now, in regards to when to showdown, it's just a percentage of how often somebody goes to showdown when they see a flop, right? So I think standard should be like in those brackets. I'm gonna tell you what the standard values are where I think they're important when I'm explaining stuff, right? So I think for when to showdown, normal values should be around 25 to 29%. So a usual guy that plays a solid game or just knows how to play at least a bit should have a showdown, when to showdown from 25 to 29%. Now, how do we use this stat in practice? So basically, if somebody has a stat of when to showdown of 27%, for example, then you cannot use this stat to help yourself out making a decision, right? It's not going to be helpful in any way, but it becomes really helpful when this value of this stat from a certain opponent is out of those brackets. Let's say it's either 20% or 40%, right? So Basically, the lower it is, the less likely they go to showdown, and the higher it is, the more likely they go to showdown. Now, this has to be viewed from two perspectives: either from him being a pre-flop aggressor, or the one who just called for example, your bad pre-flop, right? So if they're a pre-flop aggressor and they have a really low went to showdown, it probably means that they are pretty aggressive. They bet a lot, and thus they make people fold, so they don't see showdowns as much, right? So this could very well mean that they have a decent amount of, like, they play most of their hands pretty aggressively, also value bets and also bluffs, right? So when you are deciding, like, for example, if somebody bets and you're on the river and you're deciding whether you should call the river bet or not, if he has a lower went to showdown, you should be more inclined to call, because if he had a higher one, it would mean that he doesn't like to bet people out of the pot, right? He likes to go to showdown, so he probably wouldn't bet as often on the river. So if a guy with a higher went to showdown bets on the river, he's more likely to have a stronger hand. And on the other hand, which is even more important, is when you are betting, when you're a pre-flop aggressor and you're making c-bets, right? So when you see this stat, if it's, for example, on the higher side, if it's 40%, it means that this guy likes to go to showdown. It means that he's somewhat of a calling station, right? So versus this guy, you should really stop with your bluffs, right? Why? Because when you're bluffing such a guy, he's not gonna fold. He likes to go to showdown, which means that he likes to check to see the showdown, even with his second pairs, even with his third pairs, right? So he's not gonna fold. And the other way around, when you have a strong value hand, just bet like crazy versus guys like this, right? Because they go to showdown so much, which means they call with a ton of weaker hands, right? So this is where when to showdown is kind of important in that segment, right? Whether to kind of seeing whether a guy is kind of prepared to fold a lot, or if he's more of a stationary guy, right? And the next one is $1 at showdown, right? This is the percentage of how much he wins at showdown. So I think, and like usual stat should be anything from 48 to 52, I guess, something like that. I'm not sure. Don't hold me by my word on that one, but I think it's something between 48 and 52. The way I use this stat, I don't use it as often, but the way I use it, it's kind of pretty self-explanatory, right? The more he's winning at showdown, the higher the value of this stat, the less likely he probably has weak hands when he's betting, right? So if he has, let's say he has a really low $1 at showdown. So for example, let's say he has only 30%. What does that mean? That means that every time people call him, he usually has a really weak hand and loses the hand, right? Which means that he probably thin value bets too much with second pairs, third pairs. It also can mean that he also bluffs a lot, and I mean he bluffs, and every time he gets called, he just loses a hand, right? So in general, like in a ratio, he's losing way more than he's winning at showdown, right? So versus guys who are not winning a lot at showdown, I'd be more inclined to call if they, for example, bet the river and I had a difficult situation there, whether to call or fold, right? So yeah, this is in terms of that. The next line, guys, by the way, if you have any questions whatsoever while I'm explaining this, feel free to ask. I might not answer right away, but I'm surely gonna go through the chat at the end of the session and definitely answer those questions at the end. So the next line is the line that is kind of it concerns stealing overall, and then afterwards I added a river bet percentage at the end. So we're just gonna go one by one. Let me just check if this is actually correct, because I have been making some adjustments. I want to be 100% certain that this is actually how it is. Just a second. My HUD stat appearance, so it is total steal. Yeah. Basically, the first one is just total steal. It just tells you how much somebody is stealing from different positions, like from cutoff, button, and small blind, right? The higher this value, the more the more likely it is that he has a wider range there, right? I mean, this is probably still percentages pretty self-explanatory in my opinion. So the next one is going to be fold big blind to small blind steal. This looks like kind of a complex stat, but I like to use this in blind versus blind battles. This stat actually tells me how often somebody folds in the big blind when I'm in the small blind and trying to steal, right? So obviously, the higher this value, the more you should be inclined to fold the steal, right, in the small blind. So basically, if somebody has a value of over, for example, 55 or 60%, I'm probably going to be opening any two cards in the small blind and just stealing, right, because it's just going to be profitable. um it's just gonna make a lot of sense to steal in that spot because he's just gonna be folding so much, right? So yeah. What else? So just a second, guys. Okay, yeah. It's just a pretty simple stat, right? The higher it is, the more likely he is to fold. If he's folding, like for example, let's say we have this situation that is here on the table right here on the replayer, right? Oh, you cannot see it. Okay, let me just put it like this. So we have. It doesn't matter what hand we have, right? But we're in the small blind and he's in the big blind. There is already 1.5 big blind in the pot, right? So let's say we open to 2.5 big blinds here, right? So basically, how much we're risking? We're risking 2 big blinds, right? Because half a big blind is already in the pot. We're risking 2 big blinds to win how much? The whole pot. So 1 big blind plus 2.5 that's already that we put in. That's going to be in the pot, right? So 2. So to win 2 point, actually sorry, we're risking 2 big blinds to win the whole pot, which is going to be, just a second, so 2, which is going to be 3.5, right? So 2.5 that we put in plus 1 big blind in the big, 1 big blind in the big blind. So basically this means that he has to fold 57% or higher for us to make a profitable steal with any two cards there, right? So if somebody's folding 60% of the time, you should be inclined to steal a lot there in the spot in the small blind, right? Yeah, you should be really inclined to steal as much as possible in that spot. The next stat is 3-bet big blind. Okay, so 3-bet in big blind versus small blind steal. Okay, so this, as you can see, these two stats are quite heavily correlated to each other, right? Basically, what this stat tells me is how much he plays back by 3-betting in that spot, right? So it tells me how often he is 3-betting blind versus blind. So for example, if you look at the guy that we used as a sample for our stat, look, his 3-bet is 3.2%. You can see it up here, right? He's 2150 with 3.2%. So he looks really tight. But if we look at the steal department, we can see that he's only folding 80% to steal and 3-betting 18%, which means that he is the type of guy who doesn't like to give up his big blind when there is only small blind in the game. So versus this guy, you should not be stealing too wide. He's not folding and he's 3-betting a lot, right? So versus this guy, I'm rather gonna have a tighter range when I'm gonna be stealing in the small blind, right? And the other way around is going to be somebody who's folding, let's say 70% and 3-betting only 5%. That guy is going to be folding a shit ton in that spot, right? So that versus that guy, I'm just going to be stealing a lot, right? So this is just how I use these two stats. They're really important, especially in these fast games. I think people are overfolding a lot, and I think it's really important to kind of abuse every situation that's possible to try and steal those blinds, right? So definitely when somebody is overfolding or not 3-betting enough, not defending enough by 3-betting, I am going to be really inclined to steal. And these two stats help me with that, right? And yeah, the last stat is a river bet percentage. This stat I added to my HUD quite lately. I added it after the advice from a friend of mine who's been using it for a long time. It is a post-flop stat. It's quite complex stat, and it concerns river bet plays, which means that you need a pretty big sample for it to be relevant, first of all. Second of all, you're not going to be using it that often. So this stat could easily be off the HUD for my liking, because as I said, I don't like to have too many complex post-flop stats on the HUD, because the HUD should be something that should help you play post-flop to make plays, right? And then when you make plays and they call, they 3-bet and you call or whatever and you get post-flop, then I think you should start using your pop-ups to find out more of how they play post-flop, right? So I don't think like a complex post-flop or a lot of post-flop stats are needed on the HUD. I do use some for sure, but I don't want to use as much, right? So anyway, the river bet percentage is this is just an overall river bet percentage, right? It just means how the percentage of how often he bets on the river, and standard value is around 35%. Now this means just a second, guys. This means that sorry, I just had to ban this guy. I mean, guys, please don't post random links and talk in Russian, in Cyrillic, right? I've told it numerous times. I've told it numerous times that just type in English, right? I don't understand Cyrillic, or actually I do somewhat, but I don't want to have my chat in Cyrillic, right? So just use it. Use an English words. You just use your the Latin words, and everything's gonna be fine. Anyway, if I go back to this stat, river bet percentage just tells you percentage-wise of how much somebody is betting on the river. Why is this important? It's going to be important for me to this kind of determines of how often he is prepared to bluff on the river. For example, if a standard value is 35%, right? So if somebody bets 35, if he has a stat of 35%, then I cannot help it, right? I mean, I cannot help myself with that stat. It doesn't help me when I'm deciding what to do. But when it does matter is, for example, if somebody has 28%, like this stat, right? When this stat is 28%, what that means is he's not the type of guy who bets a lot on the river. So for example, if I have a mediocre hand or a bluff catcher, and a guy like that bets, I'm going to be more inclined to fold, or actually less inclined to bluff catch versus that guy. And also on the other side, if somebody has a river bet percentage over 40%, I'm gonna be really inclined to bluff catch with my good bluff catchers, right? Because it tells me that he's betting the river a lot, either by c-betting or when I check to him and he stabs. It doesn't matter. It's an overall river bet percentage, right? So it just tells me how often he is to bet the river. So I mean, this is a pretty good stat. It helped me a lot when deciding stuff, what to do. In the past, and it's actually proven as a pretty good stat. But again, you still need a bigger sample for that because it is a river stat, right? It is a more complex stat. It's a river stat, so you need a bigger sample for it. But for example, in this guy, look at this guy's case again. He's pretty tight, 21, 15, 3.2, and he has a river bet of 32%, right? So versus that guy, for example, if I'm going to be betting twice with my value hand, c-betting twice, and on the river I decide to check, and he bets, I'm going to be less inclined to bluff catch. Like the weaker my hand is going to be, my hand is going to have to be quite strong for me to check call the river versus this guy. Why? Because he's more inclined to check back rivers and not bet them, right? I mean, it is 32 only, so it's not that lower. So I wouldn't fold everything, right? But I would consider folding a bit more than versus somebody who has a 35% in that department. So I think it's a pretty interesting stat. I think you guys should give it a try, especially if you are regulars at some stakes and you have a lot of stats on people, right? Then try it out. Use a 35% as a kind of a medium, which is pretty much like anything like 33 to 36, 37 should be standard, right? And anything above or below that you can use as a help when you're deciding, when you have a difficult spot, right? And also you have to realize, I never look at only one stat, right? For example, this river bet, I'm not gonna base my river decision just on that stat. No, but if it's gonna be a close spot where I'm not gonna be sure, fuck, should I bluff catch with second pair, for example, or should I bluff catch with top pair no kicker? This stat is going to help me decide whether I want to go into a call mode or a fold mode. If I want to be bluff catching versus a certain guy more, or if I want to be folding versus a certain guy more, right? So I think it's going to be a fairly interesting stat that you can try and incorporate into your HUD, okay? Then what else? This is pretty much it for the main core, right? So let's see. Okay, Apple Cook is asking how much should you defend versus button and small blind if you are in the big blind. I think you should be. It depends a bit on the opening size for sure. Like if the button is min opening, you should be inclined to defend a lot, right? Because you get really good odds. You need to call one big blind to win like 4 big blinds or something like that, right? Or a bit less, 3.5. So you're getting really good odds. So the smaller they bet, the more you should defend, right? In general, I think, for example, big blind versus small blind, when he is stealing, I think you should be defending at least like 60% of the time, either by calling or 3-betting. For example, I like to have a 3-bet around, like, let's say anything from 7 to 15%, blind versus blind, it should be fine. Because like I always think about it like this. For example, look at this HUD that we have here for a sample, right? So this guy is stealing 37%. This is irrelevant, but look at how much he's folding big blind to small blind, still 18%, and 3-betting in the big blind 18%, right? So imagine the first one is 60% and the other one is 5, right? So if you're folding 60% and only 3-betting 5, what do you think people will do versus you? They're gonna be super happy stealing versus you, right? But now imagine this. Imagine you're folding big blind to small blind, let's say 40%, and 3-betting 13%, right? Now already people are not gonna be super happy about stealing wide versus you. Why? Because you only fold 40% of the time, plus you 3-bet quite often. 13% of the time is not that little, right? So I mean, I think you should be defending around. I mean, you could be defending anything from like. I think from anything from 55 to 70% basically, either by calling or 3-betting, right? George Prusa, hey there, mate. Thanks for the follow. Really appreciate it. The thing is, you have to realize, like in the big blind, you're always in position versus the small blind, right? That's a pretty huge advantage. You always have position. You're always the one who's closing the action. Second of all, the ranges are pretty much the widest there, right? Small blind's gonna have the widest ranges of all, excluding button, right? Button probably has wider range. So he's gonna have a weak range in most flops. A lot of people are gonna check fold the flop immediately. A lot of the people are gonna bet once and give up on the turn, right? And you can exploit that in the big blind because you have position. So you should be inclined to defend quite a lot in those positions. Okay, I gotta get my little girl from school, so I have to quit, but always number 1. We'll finish it. Yeah, definitely, mate. Have fun. And sure, as I said, I'm gonna make a highlight of this and upload it on YouTube so we can finish it off. And besides, we're pretty much almost done. I wanna only say a few words about the pop-ups, and that's pretty much it. Oh, actually, yeah, there's also the last segment. So raised first in UTG. MP, cutoff, button, and small blind. So the last one, the one on the bottom of the HUD is the raise first in percentage. This is on a different panel, so I can move it around, and this just tells me how much somebody's opening from the certain positions, right? I can immediately get a picture of if he's a huge need, if he's kind of needy in some position and really exploitative in some other positions, or if he's really abusing, like for example, button position and stuff like that, right? So basically, it just tells me how much they're opening. I can write you approximate values here. Just a second. So how do you do this? Like this? Yeah. So 15%. So I think UTG open should be around 15%, right? So anything from like 13 to 17% should be fine. If somebody's opening 20% in the UTG, he's definitely opening a bit too wide, and you can start attacking that. If somebody's opening 10%, you should be really wary because he's probably gonna have a really tight range. In the MP, it's probably gonna be around 18%, something like that should be standard. Of course, guys, don't take this number set in stone. They can deviate 1% up, 1% down, right? But for example, if somebody's opening 25% in the MP, you can assume that he's opening way too much in the MP, and you can attack that, right? And the other way around, if he's opening 10% in the MP, be crazy, be really cautious, because that shit's pretty crazy. That guy's a pretty neat, right? He's a pretty nitty guy, right? So be cautious with that one. Cutoff, I guess I would say 26%, something like that. So anything from like 24 to 20 to 30 should be standard, right? Button is really button is really player dependent, but I think you should be opening over, let's say, 55% at least here. Something like this. Anything from 55 to 70% even people can open there, right? And small blind should be probably what was probably standard is around, I don't know, 50% or something like that. These are just kind of a how do you call it? Just like not a starting points, but just kind of a points of reference, right? So you can refer to those. So for example, if you see somebody opening 15% in the cutoff, you can realize that he has a really tight range there, right? Because a usual guy is going to be opening around 25 to 30%, right? So you can already make assumptions, right? For example, if the flop is, I don't know, ace 5 deuce, you have, for example, ace 7, and he bets, you can be quite sure that that guy doesn't have weaker aces in his range because he has such a tight cutoff range, right? Venom, what's a good enough sample to assume these stats are relevant? Do you have any particular stat in mind? But in general, what plays a role is how complex the stat is. The more complex it is, the higher the sample you need. And also, the later the street, the more sample you need, right? So, for example, 3-bet pot, like 3-bet percentage is not a pretty complex stat, right? It's just how much somebody raises an open raise, right? It happens often. It happens all the time. People are 3-betting all the time. So this stat doesn't need such a huge sample to become relevant, right? Already over 50 hands, over 100 hands, you can see a trend, right? Don't make too big assumptions even with those basic stats over a small sample, but they show a trend, right? You mean the position ones. Raise first in. I think these are gonna kind of show in probably, I think probably like 200 hands are gonna show you a pretty good idea. So for example, let's say if the game is 6 max, right? So you have 6 positions. So let's say you have, to make it simple, let's say you have 600 hands on somebody, right? So 600 hands and 6 positions, right? So it means over those 600 hands, he has been 100 times on every position. So he has been on the UTG 100 times approximately, right? So you probably get the picture that out of 100 times in the UTG, if it's gonna say 30% open raise, it means that he opened 30 out of those 100 hands. So it can be a pretty decent trend saying that he's super wide in the UTG, right? And on the other hand, let's say you have 20 hands on somebody, so he was on each position 3 times, right? Over those 20 hands. So that means that maybe you need a little bigger sample for those stats to show. But these are again basic stats, raise first in, right? Because they happen all the time. You're just at some position and you open. That's it. And these hands don't need such a big sample to manifest, right? Different ones are 4-bet, for example, right? Somebody needs to open. You need to 3-bet and he needs to 4-bet you back. So this is a stat that is a bit more complex already, right? So that stat is going to need a bigger sample. But in general, the bigger samples you have on people, the more relevant the stats are going to be. So for example, if you have, let's say 1.5k hands on somebody, I think with 1.5k hands or higher, you can pretty much claim that all stats are going to be somewhat relevant. He's going to play by those stats, he's going to play in that way, right? Of course, stats don't include everything, right? We are humans after all. Who knows? Maybe somebody tilted one hand prior to that. Maybe he lost a huge stack one hand prior to this hand, right? So he might do something that is not in line with the stats he has, right? For example, this guy is 21-15 in our example. He's opening 11% in the UTG, right? So he might open, you might stack off, and he might show you 10-8 suited, for example. So 10-8 suited is never in those 11%, right? But there's definitely room for error. First of all, we only have 500 hands on him, so it's not a huge sample, right? So that's definitely an option. Second of all, he could be trying a new strategy just right now, and it might deviate from that. Third of all, as I mentioned, he might just lost a huge stack prior to this hand. He might be a bit tilted, sees a suited hand, and decides to open it, right? So you have to take those things into consideration. Stats usually don't lie, but there's always room for exceptions, right? After all, exceptions kind of, how do you call? I don't even know how it's called in English, right? Exception kind of affirms the rule, something like that. I mean, it's a Slovenian. I don't think it's just a Slovenian saying, right? But for example, I mean, it doesn't even matter. What I'm trying to say is that they can go out of their way. Sometimes these stats are gonna not those stats are not gonna be in line with what he does at a certain point, right? So they could never, like, you should never use them as a holy grail of poker, right? But it should be an addition to your help to do when you're deciding, right? For example, this guy's 21-50, and if I have a tougher decision on the river, when I look at his stats, he looks pretty tight, right? So my assumption is going to be tight guys don't bluff rivers as often. So if I'm going to have a close spot with a kind of a weakish bluff catcher, I'm going to be more inclined to fold versus this guy than to call versus this guy, right? And on the other hand, let's see if there's any aggressive guy here. Pretty much not. Or maybe this guy. We only have how much? 13 hands on this Chulo guy, right? But let's say he had this stats over a bigger sample, like he would be 38-23. This is pretty wide, right? So if this guy opens pre-flop, I'm gonna assume he has a pretty wide range. So I'm gonna be inclined to bluff catch a bit more versus guys like that who are gonna be wide like that, right? So you have to make you're always gonna have to make certain assumptions. Even when you're gonna have 10k hands on people, you're gonna have to make some assumptions. And the higher the limits you're gonna play, the more people's stats are gonna be in line in what is normal for a certain value, right? A lot of the people are going to have a river bet of 35% when you go higher, because they're going to be regulars, they're going to be well balanced. They're going to have a 3-bet of like 9%, which is pretty much something you cannot help yourself with. It's just wide enough, and it's not too tight, it's not too wide, right? So in those spots, it's going to be hard to make anything out of stats, right? But for example, a lot of the people have leaks in their game, and it's going to be shown in the stats. Somebody's going to be 3-betting too much and you can abuse it. Somebody's folding to c-bets too much. For example, look at this guy, 500 hands, and he's c-betting 90% of the time. This is probably a bit too high. So versus him, you could consider bluff raising the flop a bit more often, right? And he's only opening 11% in the UTG, for example. You can exploit that. How? By not calling too wide when he opens in the UTG, right? So yeah, or for example, let's say this guy opens in the UTG, you 3-bet him with 10s, he 4-bets, you stack off, he always shows you aces and kings. And then you say, whoa, what a cooler, right? That he had this. He's gonna have a ton of other hands over there. But I mean, is that actually the case? He's opening only 11%, right? He hasn't 4-betted so far. So when this guy opens in the UTG and 4-bets, you can be pretty sure he has a strong range. So it's actually not a cooler anymore. It's just you making a bad play, because the stats have told you he's a nit. He's probably gonna stack off here with hands only better than pocket hands, right? So it's not a cooler anymore, but your mistake. So yeah, I mean, it's gonna be a good guideline, the stats. They're not gonna be a holy grail of poker. You should not follow them blindly, but definitely kind of make use of them, right? Everybody's allowed to use HUD so far on most poker clients, so definitely something that you want to take advantage, because it's still possible, right? Magic, is there any difference between HUDs about cash and entities? I mean, are some HUDs better for use for cash and some other for entities? Sorry, this may sound stupid. No, I mean, it's not a stupid question, right? Definitely this HUD, I mean, I definitely don't want to use this HUD at tournaments. First of all, the fields are so much bigger, you're going to have less hands on people, right? So you want to use more basic stats. The stats that can kind of manifest as soon as possible, like stealing, 3-betting, opening, c-betting flop only, and stuff like that. You don't need complex stats, or for example, how much he barrels, or even when to showdown stat. Needs a higher sample, so when to showdown stat probably won't be relevant in most tournaments, on most entities you're gonna play, for example, right? So yeah, they definitely differ, right? Also, in tournaments, you're not playing full stack, you're not playing 100 big blinds deep all the time. A lot of the time you're 10 big blinds deep, 20 big blinds deep, 30 big blinds deep, right? And then like if somebody's super tight but has 3 big blinds, for example, you're not gonna fold because he's a nit. You still have to call because he's so short, for example, if he jams small blind versus big blind, etc., etc. So yeah, basically it is different. I'm not an entity expert, so that's why I also said I'm gonna kind of focus on cash aspect of the HUD, right? But they are definitely different. Different stats are more important in entities than in cash games, and vice versa, right? So yeah. Venom, do you often find people that look fishy based on stats but have improved their game drastically, for example? Probably not. I do find some. Most of the times when you have huge fish, they are either not gonna stick around long enough for them to improve that much, or you just kind of don't notice it that much, right? But where you can see the difference sometimes is with rags. When you have rags that are, for example, over tight, you can see them slowly, like in a while, that you can see them opening a lot more. They're so suddenly opening suited connectors in UTG and MP. They're opening all pocket pairs, whereas their stats doesn't tell you that, right? And that's a sign that probably he's a rag, that he's actually improving, that's actually working on his game and improving, for example, right? So yeah, definitely you can spot it in a way. That's also one consideration. For example, when you're grinding as a regular on a certain stakes, I don't think you should be using too old of hands. For example, I have for my Zoom games, I have Hold the Manager set so that it deletes hands that are older than 2 months old, right? Because I think like hands that are older than 2 months are gonna probably be way different than this guy's plays today, right? So I just want to use only up-to-date hands on those guys, right? Only hands that are younger than 2 months, basically, right? So that is definitely something you can do. You have an option in Hold the Manager where you can tell Hold the Manager when to delete hands of everybody, right? So for example, if a hand that you played versus a player is older than 2 months, boof, it's gonna get deleted and it's not gonna get regarded in the HUD, right? So that's definitely something you should do, especially if you're playing as a regular on certain limit, because then you're gonna have an influx of new hands all the time. New hands are gonna be coming in all the time because you're gonna be constantly playing with them, right? So you don't need those old hands. You can even set hands older than 1 month to get deleted, for example, if you're playing a lot and you have a decent sample on them, right? So yeah, definitely a thing to consider there. Then on what limits would you say stats become more relevant? I don't know if you ever played micros, but some people there seem to play really random, especially on regular tables. And if there are only 1 to 4 tables, I feel due to not much action, they get impatient and start playing very random. Yeah, definitely. And you have to realize, on like the smaller the limit, usually the bigger the player pool, right? There's going to be a lot of people, so you're going to see a lot of random people at those limits, right? So in those spots, obviously don't make too big of a reads based on HUD, right? But it's still good to have it, right? Because even if you have people that play random, you're going to see when somebody's playing 21-15 and is a bit more neaty, or you're going to easily spot a guy who's playing 50-10, right? Who's a huge whale, for example. So it's going to help you in that way, right? Maybe don't regard it too much, but just see he's playing 50-10, right? So 50-10, not 15, but 50-10, which means that he calls every second hand, right? And only raises 10% of them pre-flop. So you're just going to know he's a whale. So then, boof, you don't need to regard his HUD anymore. You know he's a whale, and then you play accordingly, right? You don't matter how much he goes to showdown, how much he c-bets and stuff like that. Sure, you can check it, right? But you just know he's a whale, and that is already a precious enough information for you, right? Or for example, somebody's playing 14-11. He's a huge nit, right? I mean, you don't need to regard other stats. You just see he's 14-11 and you can make plays based on that, right? So those big leaks or big play styles are still like those different play styles are still gonna manifest, even if it's micro stakes, even if it's random people, right? Of course, you have to be prepared that like 14-11 guy can get out of line sometime, as you said. They can do random stuff, right? So you can expect him to sometimes have a random hand, right? But most of the time, such a guy is gonna be a nit, right? So yeah, definitely be careful about that. When I'm always a sweat when a new guy comes to the table, NL2 with short stack and shield for hand. You never know if he really got lucky or he just came for a quick gamble. Yeah, but like most of the time, like I mean, even when you're using HUD stats, you use them in conjunction with every other kind of a clue that you get. First of all, is he a totally new player? Do you see him the first time? How many tables he's playing? What stack does he has? Sometimes you can even go as far as looking from where he's from, right? For example, Russians, Brazilians tend to be more fishy, more aggressive maybe. For example, Scandinavians can be more aggressive. I mean, it's not something that I'm gonna usually base my play on, those stereotypes from what country somebody comes from, but it can be at least a tiny help, right? If somebody's from Germany, it's more likely that he's more competent player than somebody from Brazil, for example. And no offense, I'm not saying like anything bad about Brazilians, but usually when I see Brazilians, they play they play similar to their temperament, right? They're quite aggressive. They're kind of bluffy. They like to push people around, right, by betting and stuff like that. Well, of course, you have good Brazilians, like you have professional players from Brazil, right? And they're nowhere near what stereotypes say, right? But I'm just saying you can take it as a clue if you don't have anything else, right? And for example, when a new guy comes on NL2 with a short stack and shoves the first hand, you can usually assume that he's a fish, right? And if you play like 10-20 hands on him and he shows up to be like 23-18 with 6% 3-bet, then you can change your perception of him, and he say, okay, maybe this guy actually has an idea of how he's playing, right? So yeah, chip hunter Brazilians are the spurious one. Yeah, I mean I use them for an example because yeah, that's my experience from them. They are pretty spewy. They can be pretty spewy. Of course, I also know at least one NL100 Zoom reg from Brazil who's pretty decent, right? So there are definitely exceptions to the rule, but most of the time they're going to be pretty aggressive. What else? Okay, so this is basically what, when it comes to the HUD, these are the stats I use. I do use a lot of pop-ups. In pop-ups, you want to have, as I said, more complex stats and stats that kind of are relevant post flop. For example, I have how much they c-bet on every street, how much they fold to c-bets. So c-bet, fold to c-bet on every street, how much they raise c-bets on every street, how much they bet versus misbet, so how much they are stabbing on every street. Then I have, what else? I have how much, like their aggression factor, I have it in post flop. I don't think it's that relevant, but I have it in the HUD, so I can see it later on, right? I have a check raise stat in the pop-ups. I have a limp, how he plays when he limps, right? I have a limp fold, limp call, limp raise stat in the pop-up, which could be important if you have a lot of limpers, right? I have a squeeze stat in the pop-up, how much he squeezes, right? Because I don't have it in the usuals in the HUD, and I don't think it's necessary. But if somebody's squeezing, sometimes I want to see how often he's squeezing, right? What else? Do I have anything? Total re-steal. I have re-steal in the pop-up. I also have how much he's winning at showdown when he raises flop, raises turn, raises river, for example, right? For example, if he wins at showdown like a lot when he raises flop, I'm gonna make an assumption that when he raises flop, he has a strong hand usually. But for those hands, you need a lot of hands. For those stats, you need a lot of hands to be relevant, right? So basically, I think these are all the like really important stats. Then like in pop-ups, I mean it's a really broad topic, right? It kinda also depends on the player what you should have, but the stats that you could have like are definitely continuation betting, flop plus turn plus river, and fold to c-bet on flop, turn, river. This is definitely what you can have in the pop-ups on every street. Then definitely you can have positional stats from the HUD. So 3-bet by position, fold to 3-bet by position is okay, right? Maybe 4-bet by position. This is also okay. Then what else? You can also have, what else could you have? What's important? So flop raise percentage, flop check raise, also turn plus river. Maybe they're not that relevant, but you also need a higher stats for that. You can also have what's also really important. Oh, how much people stab. So bet versus miss, c-bet, flop, turn plus river. So the higher that, like you can see how much they are betting when you check to them, right? The higher it is, the more they're probably just trying to steal the pot, for example, right? JazzDon69, hey there mate, how's it going? Hope I pronounced your name correctly. Thanks for the follow, really appreciate it. What else? Their check fold stat, for example, check fold stat. So this can tell you, for example, when he doesn't c-bet, when he checks, how much he folds. Because a lot of the people can have a low c-bet and just like to check call, right? But if they are check folding 70% or higher, you should be inclined to step versus them a lot, right? Um, what else? Like you can have a 5-bet stat, sure. Like so 5-bet percentage. Of course, so you get an idea of how often he calls a 4-bet or how often he jams, for example. Also, fold to 5-bet, right? Fold to 5-bet is also important. For example, if somebody's 4-betting a lot, you want to know how often he's folding to when you 5-bet, right? So how often he's folding, how often you should be inclined to 5-bet bluff versus him, for example. What else? Let me see. Fold to 3-bet, I said it. 3-bet, then for sure you can have squeeze, right? Squeeze is also important. It differs into 3-bet. Somebody might be 3-betting a shit ton but never squeezing a lot, or the other way around, not squeezing too much, not 3-betting too much but squeezing a lot, right? What else do I look a lot? Check raise, I told you. Aggression factor, so aggression stats tell you how aggressive people are. What else? When to showdown, I told you. So I mean, you just have to play around in the pop-ups, but most of the time you want to have stats that are kind of relevant when you're playing post-flop, right? Venom, do you have any tips for a 180 player SNG turbos? I play them sometimes after 8 p.m. when there's a lot of people, so there's enough action. The full ring ain't exactly my thing, but I still feel I'm good enough to not be a complete fish for 50 cents SNG, for example. And winning one of those 180 mans would be tasty, so I like to open a few of those. Basically, for those, I just probably, my only advice, I mean, I've never played them myself, but I think my only advice would be just to play a straightforward, solid ABC game. And given the fact that it is full ring, I think playing tighter should be better. You have to realize that early positions in the full ring games are pretty strong in those spots. So if people are opening from those positions, don't be prepared to call them too high. Don't be prepared to call them a lot, call them down a lot, and stuff like that, right? So, I mean, this would be just my general observations. I don't know too much about price structure and stuff like that, but just try to play a solid ABC, like a tag game, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Chip Hunter, Venom, do you now know a Coimbra? Yeah, he played them for his bankroll challenge. Exactly, he's a poker professional. He's sponsored by Poker Stars. He's a pretty nice guy. He's Spanish, I think, or Portuguese. I think he's Portuguese. I'm not sure, Spanish or Portuguese. But yeah, he plays those for challenge. He also streams on Twitch, so definitely check him out, right? No fluoride in my toothpaste. I'm glad to hear that, right? That's always good. So you take care for your health that much. That's good to hear. Welcome to the stream, by the way. HUDs are for the week, lol. Chip Hunter, Portuguese. Okay, yeah, he's Portuguese. Yeah, I mean, this is, I think this is debatable. I think this is not necessarily true. The thing is, everybody is using them, right? I mean, you can go on the brink, you can be a rebel and say, fuck it, I'm not going to use the HUD, I don't need it, right? But the matter of the fact is that most of the people nowadays are still using them, right? So, it just like by you not using them, you just give them an uneven advantage, in my opinion. So I mean, for example, if Poker Stars banned HUDs, or if everybody banned HUDs, I would actually be quite happy, because I'm not I mean, I do like them, I do know how to use them, I've used them for the past 6 years, so I'm quite content to using it, right? But I wouldn't mind at all like removing the HUDs, because I still think that a lot of people would be playing really bad without HUDs, right? So I actually think I would have an even bigger advantage there then. McDonald 505 and no fluoride in my toothpaste. Thanks to both of you guys for the follow. Really appreciate it. So when it comes to the matters of theory, I think this should pretty much be it in terms of HUD. I mean, as I said, I'm not going to talk too much in general about HUDs for every aspect of poker, but I wanted to kind of present you my HUD, how I use it, why I use it, and which stats I think are relevant. So I'm going to wait for like half a minute, if you guys have any questions related to these stats. If not, I'm just going to turn off the stream for now. And probably be back for a short cash game session afterwards. So yeah, no fluoride. Well, I can't play on Poker Stars in Minnesota. I won a $2,000 person free roll on Poker Stars in 2009. into the Joe Carter 209 million game into 48 without a HUD. I was just doing some whoopee. Well, like, I mean, for example, you still have, like, there's one streamer, I think it's Big Dog Pocket Fives, I think he's called. He's a pretty good MTD player, right? And actually, he said that when he started using HUD, he went on his biggest downswing in MTTs, right? So he refuses to play with a HUD, and he has some pretty decent results, right? So I'm not saying you cannot beat nowadays games, right? And probably MTTs are a bit easier to play with a HUD, without a HUD. But honestly, if you went playing, for example, some high stake, or not high stake, but NL200 Zoom or NL500 Zoom without a HUD, I think people would probably still crush you nowadays, just because like it's just such an uneven advantage. If they have HUD and stats on you and you don't have stats on them there, people are gonna be so, I don't know, they're just gonna be exploiting your league so well, and you don't, and they're gonna have such a solid game, and just HUD just helps you find those small leagues that people may have in their game, right? So yeah, I think it's I like to call it the necessary evil, right? I like to call it the necessary evil, right? Because everybody's using it nowadays, so I think it's still best to take advantage of it as long as they are allowed, right? Fluoride. Oh yeah, Cash. I would use a HUD. Yeah, okay. MTTs is a different story. A lot of the times I play MTTs without a HUD. I play MTTs on my tablet and I have decent results, right? So it's definitely absolutely not necessary. Also with the MTTs, you have less hands on people, so it's less relevant to use the stats, right? Chip Hunter Xplex doesn't use HUDs anymore. Okay. But what are his results recently? I mean, I know he's streaming. I haven't watched his streams a lot. I know he plays what, NL 100, 200 as his regular stakes, I guess. And yeah, as I said, I never said you cannot win without a HUD. I mean, I still think you can win if you have a solid, for example, if you have a solidly balanced game with using like really good logic and have like the ranges studied pretty well. I think you can do very well without a HUD, right? But I mean, HUD, at least if nothing else, is just gonna give you that a little more edge than you would have without it, right? It would make certain plus EV spots even that tiny bit more plus EV, right? I think this is the at least the positive side of the HUD still. Even though you can use it, you can be without it. It's still gonna give you that bit of additional EV, right, by using it. So yeah, okay. I guess you guys don't have any questions whatsoever. I mean, I think we made it pretty. We made it pretty clear with all the stats. I think I kind of tried to explain everything as simple as possible in as basic manner as possible. So yeah, Venom, he's a weak hunter. Maybe use HUD, but just don't stream it. Yeah, that's also one case. That's definitely true, guys. If you don't if you see somebody streaming and doesn't use a HUD, it doesn't necessarily mean he doesn't use a HUD. There's a way that you can play on poker tables and not have your HUD shown, right? So it's either that or maybe they don't use it. But if you don't know exactly, if they didn't specify themselves that they're not using a HUD, there's always a chance that they just have it hidden on the stream, right? So that's definitely the case. Anyway, guys, this is gonna be it for our first theory session. It's a short session. It's just about the HUD. My HUD. I explained it in a bit more of a detail. I hope it helped anyone. I think I can see how somebody could find it at least a bit useful, right? If you have any questions whatsoever, we are done with the video, but I'm gonna upload it on YouTube, so you can feel free to ask the questions in the YouTube comments. I'll be happy to answer. And yeah, this is gonna be it, guys. So I am going to finish the stream now. Chip Hunter, on the higher stakes, the player pool is smaller. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, obviously the people are they have that many less leaks, right? So it's kind of harder to exploit them, and the HUD is not going to show you those leaks as much, right? So you could argue you don't need the HUD there, right? Because you just have to play GTO and that's it, right? I don't trust vegans too long. I mean, I don't trust somebody more or less because he's a vegan, I guess. But yeah. I didn't watch Xplex much recently, but someone said he isn't beating the stakes anymore. Maybe because of HUD, or it was just a random hater that said he ain't beating. Yeah, that's why I asked how is he doing in his games, right? I mean, it could very well be that he's still beating it. Maybe he's actually not beating it because he's not using a HUD. I don't know. There's just too many variables to just say using a HUD or not using a HUD is equally as good as using it. I still beg to differ. I still think using a HUD is going to be more plus CV. It's not totally necessary, but I mean, if you can use it, if you are willing to put in that little additional time to learn how to use it, then I would definitely advise you guys to use a HUD. Okay. Lol, Venom. I'm not even gonna call him. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching this. I'm gonna end the stream right now. I am going to be back with the delay.